Hello, and welcome to Spirit Sadhana School of Yoga Anatomy of Yoga lesson. Today we'll be talking about the central nervous system, the spinal column, and energetic anatomy. I would like to start today's talk by asking, what is a neuron, what is a neurotransmitter, and where are they located? Go ahead and answer this to yourself now. So most likely you said a neuron and a neurotransmitter are things in the brain and they help, send messages to the body. And I guess so they would be located in the brain, right? This is what most people understand. And this is true, but it isn't the whole truth. So a neuron or nerve cell is a specialized cell that transmits nerve impulses. Neurotransmitters are the chemical messengers which send electrical impulses. But here's the interesting bit. They're located everywhere. Some are next to the spinal cord, some are in the brain, and some are in each and every organ of your body. That's right, the neurons are located everywhere. And this is so that the organs can communicate to your brain and your brain can communicate to your organs. So maybe you've heard of something called a heart brain or a stomach brain. This is something that's been a really hot topic in psychology recently, in the past, 5 or 10 years. And it's all based on how the heart communicates with the head and how the stomach communicates with the head. It's very interesting to note that the heart actually has 40,000 neurons. This means that the heart is very sensitive, we could say. It's sensitive to what's going on in the mind, your emotional landscape, if you will. And your brain and what's going on in your head is going to be communicating with your heart constantly, and vice versa. So if you think of the idiom like, my heart skipped a beat, right? Because let's say you saw someone that you were attracted to or you have a big crush on, right? So you say, my heart skipped a beat. And we see very clearly how our emotional connection with something is felt in an organ. Well, the heart's actually a muscle, but you know what I mean. So we always think of the organs and the muscles of being like without its own consciousness, but that's not necessarily true. And the amount of neurons that we see in the heart is a very strong evidential kind of proof of this. And it's so curious because this is what the yogis have been saying for all time. Yeah, that the mind and the body are connected. And it's only recently that we're really beginning to understand that in the modern world. So now an even stronger example is the stomach brain. And more than just the stomach, we're really talking about the gut, the intestines, because there are over 100 million neurons. It's a really action-packed place, and there are many idioms in the English language that kind of talk about this, like, I just had a gut feeling, right? Or my stomach sank. These kinds of expressions where our emotions are felt somewhere in the body, right? And this is because of how many neurons we have in this area. That means that the mind and this area are very, very well connected. And we'll talk about later how it is that they are exactly connected. But it's interesting to note here because the yogis put even more special emphasis on this region of the body. They called it Nambi chakra. It's we also call it like the solar plexus. It's where there's a lot of energy. And according to yogic terms, it's like a place of a lot of energy, right? And it's only been recently that there's been all this research about how, the health of your gut really can affect your mental health. And it's interesting, and when you think about it, it makes a lot of sense, right? Like, if you're very anxious, a lot of times you have diarrhea. Or if you're depressed, a lot of times you might be constipated, right? Like, your emotions really directly translate into what's going on in the gut. And, that's due largely in part to the fact that there's so many neurons there that they're just so strongly connected. So it's interesting to note that the number of neurons in the stomach is way more than there are in the spinal cord and in the rest of the nervous system. So the yogis were right. Yeah, there is special importance in this area. So now let's look at exactly how these messages get conveyed between the mind and the body. So, how do neurons send signals to the brain? Well, that's through the spinal cord. The spinal cord receives and transmits electrical signals throughout the entire body and then back to the brain. The spinal cord is protected by the vertebra, which are the bones running down your back, and also by the cerebral spinal fluid, which helps to cushion the nerve tissue. Okay, so you see here a picture of the vertebral column, and you see we have a section in purple, in green, orange, and red. And the reason why we have this different colors is because we have differentiated in between the cervical spine, the thoracic spine, the lumbar spine, and the sacral spine. And I would like to ask you now, why do you think that we have changed the cervical spine into the thoracic spine where we do? Why is it in between C7 and C8 instead of, why don't we just have 12 cervical spine? Or why do we have any division at all, right? And that's because the spine has natural curves, and where those curves take place, we've decided to change the name of that part of the spine. And the reason for this is because along where that curve is where the majority of the body weight is supported. Okay, so those are areas of specific importance, and they're doing a lot of load bearing. And so actually, if you're going to have an injury, most likely 80% of the time it's going to be in one of those areas. Okay, so it's either going to be in between C7 and T1, or T12 and L1, or in the lumbar spine. It's true that because this is the most load bearing of the whole vertebral column, it could be in any one of them, but most likely it will be affected in the L1 or L5. And I wanted to further ask of you, what do you think what is the job of the spinal column, right? We've said that the spinal vertebra inside of that is the spinal cord, and the spinal cord is the thing that transmits the electrical impulses. But so what is the main purpose of the vertebra, right? And the answer is it's to protect the spinal cord, okay? It's not just to allow us to have movement, it's to really protect that spinal cord, because as that's where the messages are being transmitted, if something happens to interrupt those electrical impulses, death can result, okay? So just think of if you severed your spinal cord, and depending on what area, you might lose ability to move the limbs, but if you sever it in the cervical spine, that could affect breathing, okay? So obviously without the ability to breathe, you would not be able to survive. So it's extremely important. It's our vital life energy inside of there. We have to maintain it intact. So the vertebra have a very important job. And it's interesting to note that the ancient yogis really understood this. They said they gave super great importance to the vertebral column, and they said that that's where the prana, the life energy, flows, right? And that's very similar to what we understand in Western anatomy, that is where the electrical impulses are being carried out, and without them, we wouldn't live. So it's amazing to think that just through meditation, the yogis were able to understand this and 5,000 years ago. So we'll talk more about that when we talk about energetic anatomy. And I just wanted to make a quick note here. You see that you have a letter and a number. So C1, C2, C3, C4, da, 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 then T1, T2, T3, da, 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 L1, L2, L3. And this is just so we can specifically talk about areas on the vertebra. Okay, so, and each vertebra has a job. So like, C3 controls the muscles of the neck, C4, the eye, for example. And here you're actually seeing a C8, and that's actually because it's referring to the pair of spinal nerves. There isn't actually a vertebra, but that's just a detail. Then we have T1 to T12 and L1 to L5. And I wanted to say that, so in general, the area the vertebra is located is going to be close to whatever it controls. So, the cervical spine and the thoracic spine are going to control the head and the neck and the chest. It's not that C1 is going to control your foot, most likely, right? Because it's not located close by. For the most part, it's like this. And I want to talk now a little bit about the cervical nerves. So each vertebra has a pair of spinal nerves that have a specific job, okay? So we'll look at this now. Yes, okay. So there are 33 vertebrae in the spinal column. And we have, if you want to remember, American breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Okay, so Americans have breakfast at 7 a.m., lunch at 12, and dinner at 5. So there's 7 cervical vertebra, 12 thoracic vertebra, 5 lumbar, and then we have the pelvis. And I just wanted to ask you, why do we talk about the pelvis as just like one thing? And that's because, well, we have the sacrum and then we have the coccyx. And the sacrum, those vertebrae are fused, and same with the coccyx. And what do you think that means as far as movement goes? It means that it's only going to have very limited movement, and really the movement that they do have comes from the muscles surrounding them. So the pelvic tilt that we can get really comes from the psoas muscle, for example, and the gluteus muscles. But not so with the rest of the vertebra. They have movement along several axes. They have flexion, extension, and rotation. So there's definitely a lot more movement in the rest of the vertebral column apart from the sacrum and the coccyx. And part of that is due because there's this cushion in between the vertebrae, and that cushion allows for more movement, and it's has liquid inside of it, so it's cushions as we walk as well. And we'll look a little bit more at that soon. So let's look here. This is one of my favorite pictures. The interesting part for me about this whole thing is that every vertebra has a pair of spinal nerves, and those spinal nerves directly plug into different organs, and It's kind of like, you know, an electrical cord. Yeah, it really does like plug into something. We call that in anatomy innervation. So you can see on this diagram here how different nerves from the different parts of the spinal column control different things. So you can see, the heart and the lungs are located at the top of the thoracic vertebra, right? Or the thoracic spine. And in the lumbar spine, we have things like the small intestine. Okay, so, and you can see here in this picture really well, does a good job of illustrating how long some of these nerves are, right? Normally when we think about the vertebral column, we think about the bones, we don't think about the nerves that are coming out of it. But the nerves that come out of it are pretty similar to the vascular system, right? It's running throughout the whole entire body, and some of them are super duper long, that goes all the way from the cervical spine to the tips of your fingers, or from the lumbar spine to the tips of your toes. So really, the nerves are very long, and some of them interconnect, and we'll look at that in a minute. So let's go on here. Okay, so they're called spinal nerves, and this is part of the peripheral nervous system. When we say peripheral nervous system, that's what we're referring to, right? The system of nerves that run throughout the body. There are 31 pairs of spinal nerves, and they're on either side of the vertebral column. Okay, so one comes out one side, one comes out the other side. And there are 8 pairs of cervical nerves. That's where we said that there's 7 vertebrae, but there's 8 pairs of nerves. And that just has to do with how we evolve through our development from children to adults. And then we have 12 pairs of thoracic nerves, 5 pairs of lumbar nerves, 5 pairs of sacral nerves, and just 1 pair of coxogenical nerves. And let's look here. Now a little bit getting into the different kinds of nerves, starting with the cervical nerves. The cervical section of the spinal cord is located in the neck, and the cervical nerves control the motion and the senses in the neck. So like I was saying before, normally the nerves that they're going to be located near what they control. Okay, let's go to the neck here. Okay, so we see here the cervical spine, and we see a section for innervation, and we see a section for possible symptoms. So let's look. C1 to C3 control, for a large part, the central nervous system, the brain, the pituitary gland, the face, the ears, the eyes, the nose, the head, diaphragm, neck muscles. Okay, so everything kind of in this area. And here on the other side, we have possible symptoms. So we have headaches, migraines, earaches, cold, flu, sore throat, vertigo, anxiety, allergies, these kinds of possible symptoms. And when we're talking about this, we mean like possible symptoms if there's a problem in this example, in C1 to C3. So let's say you have a hernia in C1 or C2. You might have these possible symptoms. You might have allergies, for example. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a hernia in the disc of the vertebra. It could just be that it's like a pinched nerve, for example. It's not as serious as a actual spinal hernia, and but it could still result in many of these possible symptoms. Now I want you just to think, why? Why could it, why if I have like a pinched nerve in C1, could I have some of these symptoms? And the answer should come to you that the electrical impulses is being interrupted. Pinched nerve. Okay, the nerve is being compressed. The electrical impulse cannot be properly translated. So you could have any number of those symptoms. And let's take another example, okay? So in C4 to C7, that controls the neck muscles, thyroid, sinus, mouth, vocal cords, arms, elbows, wrists, hands, fingers, and so on and so forth. And you might have possible symptoms of weight gain, insomnia, fatigue, sinusitis, headaches, vertigo, allergies, numbness, tingling, dizziness, those kinds of things. So let's say we have a problem in C5. We have a pinched nerve in C5, and we might end up affecting the thyroid. So if you're affecting the thyroid, that's gonna directly impact metabolism. So weight gain or weight loss in some case could also be. That's because the electrical impulses are being inhibited, and the hormones that need to work in the thyroid are not going to be able to function properly. Okay, so now I want to propose you this question. Why is this interesting to me as a yogi or as a yoga teacher, right? Why would I want to study this? What good could it be for me to know? Go ahead and just think about it. Okay, good. So maybe you've come up with the answer that, when we're doing yoga asana, we are taking care of the spinal column, and a lot of times we're working to create space in the spinal column so that those electrical impulses can do their job properly, right? So that all of these things that are innervated by the the spinal nerves, they can properly do their job, right? So the different systems of the body are able to function as they're meant to function. So that's one part of the answer. And the other part is we can say, okay, I'm suffering from allergies. I've been suffering from allergies my whole life. Well, maybe I might think, okay, well, if I have allergies, then maybe I need to work on creating more flexibility and movement in my cervical spine. Because if I have more flexibility and movement in my cervical spine, the messages are going to be able to be communicated better, with my sinus region, and it could help to alleviate symptoms. So it's kind of like you can treat symptoms based on working different parts of the spinal cord, the spinal column. And this doesn't necessarily just need to be with yoga asana. This also can be through meditation and through pranayama, because not everything needs to be exercised on a gross level. We can also exercise it sort of on a subtle level. And what I mean by gross and subtle is the gross body is like the bones and the muscles and the physical body, and the subtle body is more the energetic body. Can even be as subtle as emotions, right? So through other practices of yoga as well, like meditation, we lower stress levels, which is going to allow the electrical impulses to flow in the way that they need to and not be interrupted. With pranayama, that's somewhere in between subtle and gross body, because it will be it's kind of like the gateway in between the subtle and the gross body, really. The energetic body, the pranamaya kosha. Talk more about that later. But so if a student comes to you and you're a teacher and they say, I'm having trouble with weight gain, and no matter what I do, I'm gaining so much weight and I can't seem to lose it. Well, you might say, well, potentially there's a problem going on in the vertebra. Maybe you have a problem in this cervical spine that's affecting the function of the thyroid. So I'm going to give this person very gentle, because if they're having a problem, you don't want to give them like stand on your head exercises. That's not what we're looking for. We want to gently, slowly increase the amount of movement to that area so that the energy can properly flow. Okay, just for example. So let's move on and look at some further examples. Now we have the thoracic spine, okay, and the thoracic nerves. So the thoracic nerves are the spinal nerves emerging from the thoracic vertebra. There are 12 thoracic nerves and 12 thoracic vertebrae. Here we have a nice number. They're both the same. They run between the ribs and down your back. And the thoracic nerves supply the trunk and the abdomen, and they control most of your torso. So again, they control the things that they are near for the most part. Okay, so moving on to the thoracic spine, and we're not going to talk about each and every one of these things, but we'll just take a few examples from each section. So, okay, we see here T1 to T12, 12 thoracic vertebrae, and there are 12 pairs of nerves. So these nerves control everything from the heart to the back. So let's just take a specific example. Let's take breathing here. So as this is such a vital importance, obviously, if we have a pinched nerve or a herniated disc in the, let's say, T2, this might affect how I breathe. It could even have a symptom of chronic coughing, shortness of breath. This could cause fatigue because if I'm not getting enough oxygen, asthma, bronchitis. So let's kind of think of any sort of problems related to the lungs. So if someone comes to me and they say, I get, bronchitis every year, and I have asthma, and, I've always had difficulty with, areas related to breathing. Well, we could think, okay, so maybe you're having an issue in the upper part of your thoracic spine. I'm going to give you asana and pranayama that could directly help you to increase the flow of energy in this area. So again, we don't want to give them, if someone is presenting with a symptom, we don't want to give them a really strong asana like the headstand, for example, because although this is good in a person who isn't presenting with symptoms, it's good for their flow of energy. We need to be careful when it is someone who is already having an issue in one of these areas. So instead, we might say, let's do Prasarita Padottanasana, which is a hanging forward fold. Because this is like a mini inversion, it'll create traction in the spine. So more space will be created in between the discs, and that should increase the flow of energy. In Western anatomy terms, that means I can increase the electrical impulses. They will be more free to send their electrical activity because they will not be compressed. Okay? And on a more subtle level, with the pranayama, you'd be increasing energy to the same area. Let's take one more example from the thoracic spine. How about the small intestine? Okay, so around T10 to T12, someone, let's say, has IBS, irritable bowel syndrome. This is, pretty common actually. Many people have issues when it comes to digestion, and IBS is one of the more common ones. And we could prescribe, we can use the word, specific asanas that would help increase the movement and flexibility of the lower thoracic spine. So perhaps twisted poses could be good, but gentle. Yeah, you don't want to put them in Marichyasana D, for example, because that's going to be too strong. But a variation of it, perhaps, so gentle twist pose, twisted prayer pose with the knee on the floor, so it's not, the full posture. So, those kinds of asanas could be beneficial in this regard. Let's go on now to a few more examples.